You can't fish here. The voice came sharp from behind his shoulder. James didn't even flinch. He slowly reeled in the line, calm on the outside, though his chest was tight. I live here, he said, without turning around. The HOA board member crossed his arms, standing a little too close now. That doesn't mean you can fish wherever you want. This lake has rules. James finally looked up, his eyes steady. I read the handbook. It says residents can fish from the bank. The man smirked. It says they can fish with proper approval. And I don't recall signing off on yours. The air felt colder than the breeze. James blinked, confused. This is my property. My daughter and I live right there. He pointed across the grass. We've been here 2 months, and we've had complaints for one, the man snapped. You've been down here almost every weekend. Folks say it's disturbing. Disturbing, like he was noise. Not a man, not a father spending time with his daughter. James clenched the fishing pole a little tighter. I come here to think. I don't play loud music. I clean up after myself. I even pick up trash other folks leave behind. Well, maybe it's not about trash. The man smiled thinly. Maybe it's about presence. This is a shared space. We try to keep things welcoming. He meant white, clean, controlled, silent. James nodded slowly. So you're saying I'm not welcome? The man raised his hands. Don't twist my words. You twisted your tone before your words ever came, James said, standing now. He wasn't threatening. He didn't raise his voice, but his back was straight, and that seemed to make the man uneasy. The man glanced over James's shoulder toward the road where another HOA member had pulled up in a golf cart. He gave a small wave. The two exchanged looks. Just letting you know you're getting a formal notice, the man said, backing up. Fishing without HOA clearance is a $75 fine. It'll be on your doorstep by Monday. James didn't move. You walk up to every person who fishes here? The man's face tightened. I don't see anyone else out here every Saturday like it's their personal pond. You don't see anyone else, James said slowly. That's the first true thing you've said. The man's eyes flicked away. Look, don't make this a bigger deal than it is. It's just a rule. Follow it, and you won't have any problems. James had followed rules his whole life, and somehow the problems always found him anyway. When he got home, his daughter Mila was on the porch steps coloring in the notebook she always carried. She looked up, her little smile fading when she saw his face. They said something again? He nodded. Fine this time. She looked down. Just for fishing? He sat beside her. They don't want me by the lake. They think I don't belong. Mila frowned. But you bought this house. James looked out at the water in the distance. Buying something doesn't mean they see you as part of it, and that was the part that stung the most. At work on Monday, James didn't say much. His coworkers knew he was quiet, always did his job, stayed out of mess. But that morning he was quieter than usual, and his supervisor, a heavy-set guy named Carl, noticed. Everything all right, James? James gave a small nod. Just HOA stuff. Those folks again? James didn't reply, but the look on his face said everything. Carl leaned in. You know, I used to live in one of them communities. Thought it'd be all neat grass and smiling neighbors. Turned out it was all rules and quiet hate. James gave a dry chuckle. Yeah, that sounds familiar. Carl shook his head. It ain't right. You work your whole life for peace, and they try to take it because they don't like who's enjoying it. That evening, the letter came. White envelope, black ink, red numbers, $75 fine, fishing violation. Beneath it, this is a second informal warning. Repeated offenses may result in legal action or access restriction. Access restriction? James stood at his kitchen counter, reading the line again. They were threatening to ban him from a lake he paid homeowner dues to maintain. His hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from tiredness. Tired of trying to fit into places where the rules changed just to exclude him. Tired of nodding, staying calm, being polite while being erased. He walked out onto the back patio. The lake glistened under the moonlight. So calm, so peaceful. He used to dream of this. But what was a dream worth if you had to keep proving you belonged in it every day? The next weekend he didn't go fishing. He sat inside next to Mila and helped her paint. But she noticed. You're not going today? He shook his head. Not today. Is it because of them? He didn't want to lie. So he said, yeah. Mila looked down. That's not fair. James smiled sadly. It's not. Monday came, and with it another envelope. This time $150. Repeated violation of HOA Code 3.7. Unauthorized recreational use of community property. James dropped the letter on the counter, walked out to the garage, and stood beside a dusty cabinet. He opened it slowly. Inside was a folder with bank papers, investment accounts, and one bold header. Private Purchase Interest, Lakewood Reserve Holdings. James had been watching the lake's ownership status for months, ever since he moved in. The lake wasn't HOA owned. It belonged to a third-party family trust that leased it to the neighborhood via contract. And last week, that contract had expired. He had already made the call, already put in the first offer, he just hadn't said anything. I was hoping I wouldn't have to. The next HOA meeting was Thursday night. It was held in the small clubhouse, packed with chairs and coffee, cups and forced smiles. James showed up in jeans and a button-down, calm as ever. The board president, a woman named Cheryl, gave him a thin smile. "Mr. Garner, you here to discuss your fines?" James nodded. Among other things, the meeting started. Pet complaints, lawn height, pool filters. Then Cheryl cleared her throat. "Now, to address a continuing issue, Mr. Garner has repeatedly violated lake fishing rules despite 2 warnings and applicable fines." All eyes turned to him. Cheryl kept going. "If he refuses to comply, we may be forced to restrict his lake access entirely." James stood. He pulled a folded document from his jacket and placed it gently on the table. "I'd like to read a short statement," he said. Cheryl blinked. "This isn't—" "It'll take 1 minute," James said. Calm, even, respectful. No one stopped him. He looked at the paper, then looked around the room. "I moved here because I wanted peace. A lake to fish, a quiet place for my daughter. I followed every rule you handed me, paid every fee, respected every line, and in return I've been watched, warned, and fined for sitting by water." His voice stayed calm, but every word landed heavy. "I learned something last week. The HOA doesn't own this lake. A private trust does, and their lease with you expired." He lifted the second page. "This is a copy of my purchase contract. I now own the exclusive recreational rights to the lake." Gasps filled the room. Mouths opened, eyes widened. James looked at Cheryl, then at the man who had fined him 2 weeks ago. "From this point on, access is granted only to those on my approved list, and the HOA board is not on that list." Silence, then whispers, then louder silence. James didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth was louder than anything they'd said to him. He picked up his papers and walked out. He had nothing more to prove, because peace shouldn't come with permission. It should come with pride. James sat in his small den, sunlight cutting through the blinds and dust motes dancing in the air. He had spent 20 years building this life, driving 18-wheelers across state lines, sleeping in truck stops, missing birthdays and graduations to send money home. His hands trembled a little as he unfolded the purchase contract, the paper crinkling beneath his fingers, because deep down he still felt the weight of every mile and every sacrifice he'd made. He pressed calloused palms to the tabletop, remembering his father's weathered hands. On weekends, little James had followed him to a nearby creek, learning how to bait a hook and tie a knot. Those were the happiest memories. Simple, free, unmarked by judgment. His father taught him that dignity was earned, not given, but also that a man deserved peace. His mother worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on and put food on the table. They lived in a small apartment, with paint peeling off the walls. He knew struggle was normal. He knew how to wake before sunrise, sweat through labor, and come home too tired to eat sometimes. But he also knew how to hope. His parents told him, "Son, remember who you are. Don't let anyone make you feel smaller than your own shadow." In high school, he became the first in his family with real grades, good grades. He planned to go to college, but life doesn't always follow a straight line. His father fell ill, and the bills piled up. He dropped school to work full-time to pay for treatment, to fill their home with groceries. Every dollar he earned was a promise he made to his family, that the pain they felt wouldn't swallow them whole. Later, when his father passed, he carried that grief for years. He poured himself into truck driving, because it paid, because, in the empty highways, he could think. He could talk to his father in his head, forgive him, ask him questions the world never got to. He delivered people's goods, their work, their dreams, all while storing peace inside himself in quiet moments by roadside ponds during breaks. That quiet peace stayed with him even when he met Mara, his wife, and they had Mila. They built a home together, even though the bank said no the first time, then the second. They saved, they waited, they finally held the front door keys on a warm June day. Their smiles filled that space until they could breathe again. Now he watched his daughter brush wisps of hair behind her ear. She was 6, sharp as a tack, gentle and fierce. They came here for her, to give her room to stretch, to feel safe. When she ran to the lake with her fishing pole after school, he wanted her to feel the same freedom he'd once felt. He fought for that sense of belonging, not for him, but so she'd never feel like an outsider in her own world. Every time he replayed the HOA confrontation, his chest tightened, not because of the money, that fine was small. No, it hurt because it meant someone believed he didn't belong here, that his presence was a disturbance. Here, where he had built a life, where he paid every cent. He often wondered what their real objection was. Was it the color of his skin? The way he spoke? The fact that he didn't dress like their suits? None of those things were grounds for exclusion, but the sting was the same. He remembered the nights they sat together on the edge of the dock, the smell of fresh water, the soft lapping of waves, the distant call of a loon. Those moments matter. They hold a man's heart together when everything else tries to pry it apart. In those nights, he told his daughter stories about her great-grandfather, who escaped sharecropping, traveled north, and built a bakery from nothing. She listened, wide-eyed, learning that hard is part of their blood, but so is hope. He realized that everything he was fighting now wasn't just for himself. It was for her, to keep her dreams from shrinking, to let her feel safe when strangers stared. He needed her to know that standing tall, even when they push you down, is where courage lives. He thought about his trucker friends who fell quiet when they saw someone different at a stop. He thought about his little sister's timidness when she talked to her white teachers in college. He remembered his own voice shaking when he stepped into bank offices to apply for loans. Never trust quick smiles. Let them earn your worth. That had been his mantra. And now it was time to let his actions prove it. He cleared his throat and looked at the contract again. Peace shouldn't cost his dignity. He would not give in to the feeling that he was always wrong. He deserved to belong here. He had earned every drop of this serenity. And if people refused to see it, he would show them, not with anger but with undeniable truth. The room was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. His daughter's sleep sounds, from her room, drifted softly through the hallway. He felt a fierce protectiveness rise in him. If the world tried to tell her she didn't belong, especially in her own backyard, he would fight back harder than ever before. On Wednesday night, he sat at the desk and scribbled a short note to his old fishing friend, Marcus. Want to talk? Tomorrow. Needs to be about something bigger than just fishing. He folded the paper, placed it inside an envelope, and sealed it. Late, he went to bed. He lay awake for hours, thinking of every cruel glance, every unfair rule. But he also thought of every moment they'd shared by that lake. The laughter, the peace, the quiet victories. He resolved that those moments wouldn't be tainted by this fight. They would light the path forward, because dignity is shown, not asked for. He finally closed his eyes, ready to carry that brave truth into tomorrow's meeting. He was no longer quietly angry. He was quietly determined. Everything he'd sacrificed pointed to one clear question. What am I willing to do to make sure my daughter never thinks she doesn't belong? James walked into the HOA clubhouse on Thursday with silent determination. The air smelled like stale coffee and cheap muffins. Chairs were lined up like a courtroom. Neighbors stared, their eyes sharp with expectation. He felt every gaze like a judgment. Cheryl, the board president, tapped the microphone. She began the meeting with small talk about landscaping, pool standards, then her tone shifted. And now we'll address Mr. Garner's behavior, she said. She folded her hands on the podium. He's been fishing without approval. He's ignored warnings. We've had complaints. He stepped forward. His palms were steady, but inside anger flared. He'd kept calm too long. A woman in the back raised her hand. He fishes all afternoon. Kids can't swim. She frowned. He brings his daughter there every weekend. James held his gaze patiently. Is bringing my daughter a problem? Her voice shook. It's not a nursery, it's a lake. We were promised quiet, order. A man near the door cleared his throat. You seem to take up space. His tone was polite, but the words cut. It feels like you're flaunting things. James felt heat rise. He forced himself to breathe. I've followed every rule. You warned me. I paid fines. I didn't take anything. Just wanted peace. The man shook his head. Rules don't work if you do what you want and pay later. He shrugged. You can't just walk in here expecting us to believe you. His words echoed in James's head. You can't just walk in here expecting us to believe you. Felt like a punch to the gut. James spoke quietly. I don't need your belief. I earned this. I paid dues. I bought my home. I paid fines. That's all I've ever done. Murmurs rolled through the room. He couldn't know who sympathized, but he felt their eyes. Cheryl looked down at her list. Enough. We need resolution. Either comply or we'll ban fishing privileges. James's pulse pounded. He glanced at Mila. She sat behind him, her small face a mask of confusion. He knelt beside her, whispered, I'll fix this. She nodded. When the meeting ended, whispers followed him. He's pushy. He's ugly about it. Next, he'll want exclusive access. He didn't say anything, just lifted Mila and walked out. That night at home, he paced the living room. The rejection stung. It wasn't just about fishing anymore. It felt bigger. Identity, acceptance, belonging. He felt trapped in their expectations. Mila tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, are they mad at me? He crouched down. They're uncomfortable. That's their issue, not yours. You belong here. She looked up, brave for her age. What if they call security next time? He swallowed. Then I'll call them on why they want to scare my daughter away. The next Saturday, he walked to the lake with Mila. They brought chairs, books, lunch. He sat up quietly. Nearby, 2 HOA members watched from a golf cart. They parked close. He felt their pull. One approached. "Sir, this is private property." He looked at Mila. "Please leave." James folded his hands. "I'm allowed here." The man's posture didn't change. "No, you're not," Mila whispered. "Daddy." James looked down. He saw fear, not in himself, but in her face. His heart clenched. He spoke softly. "We'll leave if that's what you want." The man smirked. "That's what we want." He turned and walked away. Mila held his hand. Silence followed them. At home, James closed the door. The sense of defeat felt thick. He looked at Mila. Her eyes were red. "I'm sorry, baby." She leaned against him. "I don't understand. We pay. We live here." He kissed her head. "I know." They sat at the table, dinner untouched. That Monday, James went to work. Carl noticed the hollow in his eyes. "They shut you down?" James nodded. "They did, with an audience." Carl frowned. "Man, I'm sorry. They don't see the years you drove, the money you paid, the promise you made." James rubbed his forehead. "I feel like no matter what I do, I'm just the guy who's asking too much." Carl shook his head. "Nah, keep pressing, keep living. Screw their peace. Peace isn't quiet when it's built on exclusion." James nodded slowly. Carl's words touched him. Maybe pushing back didn't have to mean breaking rules. Maybe it meant breaking expectations. That evening, James met Marcus at their old fishing spot, a roadside pond Marcus had found years ago. Marcus looked older now, but his eyes were bright. When he saw James, "Let me guess," he said, "you got cursed by the HOA?" James chuckled softly. "You could say that." They sat on the bank. James told him everything. Complaints, fines, clubhouse shame, security threats. He watched water shimmer in lamplight. Marcus didn't say much. Finally, he handed James a beer. "This ain't about fishing, man." James took the bottle. "I know." Marcus looked at him. "They're scared of you, of what you might do if you don't step in line. That's what you're facing. That's bigger than water." James stared at ripples. "Then maybe I need to stop stepping." Marcus nodded. "Maybe." They sat until night swallowed them. James thought of Mila, of his father, of every mile he'd driven just to give his family a shot. He realized the fight wasn't over. It was just begun. Next Wednesday, he showed up at the HOA office. He handed the receptionist a letter. "No one sees me now," she said. He smiled politely. "I'd like to request all HOA complaint records against me and a copy of their lake access agreement." She looked surprised. She leaned forward. "That's a lot." He lifted his chin. "I earned the right to that much. I'll wait." 2 days later, the secretary came out with a thick folder. Complaints about parking, noise, presence. Not single mention of wildlife disturbance. All vague, coded. James's jaw tightened. We weren't complaining about trash or trolling lines. We were complaining about belonging. He posted the documents to the HOA board, along with his written request to buy the lake rights before any legal ban could stand. He included the purchase contract. That Thursday, he returned to the clubhouse meeting. This time, his presence was charged. When Cheryl opened the meeting, he handed her a copy of everything. She flipped through them, her face tight. He stood and spoke simply. "You see this? They never said anything about danger to the lake. They complained about me. Complaints about me are complaints of not fitting in." He met every silent stare. "I followed rules. I paid. I asked politely. I was denied all access. Yet I'm the one accused of breaking code." He held up the purchase contract. "So I bought access rights. Not to hurt anyone, not to exclude anyone, but because if I waited for permission, there would always be someone saying no." His voice was calm but determined. He looked at them all. "I don't want war. I want respect. I want my daughter to know. Dignity isn't something you beg for. It's something you own." The room held its breath. Again, murmurs. But this time, uncertainty edged them. He walked out with Mila waiting. He didn't yell. He didn't storm. He simply arrived with the facts. He changed the game. And the HOA didn't know how to regain control. They had escalated it into a public fight, and he escalated back. Intelligence matched with quiet resolve. The next time James showed up near the lake, he wasn't holding a fishing rod. He wore a navy blue blazer, plain but powerful, and carried a small binder in his left hand. He wasn't alone. 3 men in suits followed him, one of them holding a legal folder marked with bold red tabs. Cheryl stood near the clubhouse entrance, mid-conversation with the HOA treasurer. Her face stiffened when she saw him. "Mr. Garner," she said slowly, "we already addressed the matter." He didn't stop walking. He looked her in the eye. "Yes, and now I'm here to conclude it." One of the suited men stepped forward. "Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Morris, attorney representing Mr. James Garner." We're delivering formal confirmation of lake ownership transfer. Cheryl blinked. Excuse me? James pulled out the binder, opened it, and handed it to her. The lake you fined me over, the lake you banned my daughter from, the lake you used as a weapon, is mine now. The crowd started gathering. People paused mid-walk. Lawn chairs turned. Phones rose. To record. Neighbors looked from one face to another, unsure what they were witnessing. Cheryl's hands trembled slightly as she flipped through the documents. This is some kind of threat? James kept his voice calm. No, it's a fact. The lake's title and water rights were held by the original land developer. That developer was bought out last year by a private trust. I purchased the trust last week. Another suit stepped forward. We have recorded deeds and verified purchase filings. The HOA never owned the water rights. You regulated something that didn't belong to you. A man from the back shouted, "You can't do this. That's our lake." James turned. You mean the lake I was fined $500 for touching? The one you said I didn't have access to? That one? The man's mouth opened, then shut. James stepped forward. His voice carried. All my life I worked quietly. I earned. I obeyed. I gave grace when I didn't receive it. But you made it clear I didn't belong here. Not because of rules, but because of who I am. He looked around. You turned a lake into a gate. You used rules to draw lines around people you didn't understand. And now you're standing on ground you never legally owned. Silence fell. Every eye was on him. Cheryl forced a laugh. You expect us to believe you're some rich man now that you just bought a lake? James reached into his pocket, pulled out a card, walked up and handed it to her. This is the name of my holding company. I started it 15 years ago. We manage residential developments, farmland, and yes, water bodies. This lake is one of 12 I now own in this state. Her hand clenched the card. She didn't speak. He wasn't finished. When I moved here, I did it because I believed this neighborhood was safe. I thought it would give my daughter something better than what I had growing up. But what you showed me, Dad, is that safety isn't in gates or grass. It's in dignity, and dignity has no zip code. A woman near the bench whispered, "He owns 12 lakes?" Another said, "He's been a developer this whole time?" James didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He just looked at his daughter, who had walked up beside him and taken his hand. One of the board members stammered, "So, what happens now?" James looked at him evenly. "I'm putting up a notice this week. Lake access is suspended for 30 days while we assess liability and reissue permits. Fishing will still be allowed. For families, for kids, for peace, not politics." Cheryl's voice cracked. "You can't just shut us out." He turned slowly. "You did it to me. My daughter sat crying in the back seat while you called security. You didn't blink. You thought your rules made you right." He didn't shout, but every word landed hard. "Now your rules don't apply, and I'm not here to humiliate you. I'm here to remind every person watching this. Respect is a two-way street, and you don't get to slam the door in someone's face then cry when they own the house." The lawyer stepped forward again, handing Cheryl a copy of the new policy draft. "You'll receive an official letter with access terms. For now, we recommend no further public disputes." Cheryl stared at the paper. "This isn't how neighborhoods are supposed to work." James shook his head. "You're right. They're supposed to lift each other up, not cut each other down. But when neighbors turn into judges, sometimes the only way to win is to change the courtroom." Mila looked up at her dad. "Do we get to fish now?" He smiled softly. "You can fish. As long as you want, sweetheart. This whole lake is yours now." The crowd was speechless, and slowly, as James walked back toward his house, hand in hand with his daughter, heads began to turn, not in disgust, not in dismissal, but in something like awe. The man they once tried to fine into silence now owned the very place they used to keep him out. The next community meeting wasn't meant to be public, but by the time the HOA board gathered inside the clubhouse, more than 100 residents stood outside, some leaning against the stone walls, others sitting on fold-out chairs. Everyone had heard, and everyone was watching. Inside, Cheryl sat stiffly at the end of the conference table, her lips pressed in a line. The treasurer and vice president exchanged nervous glances. A few of the newer board members looked like they didn't want to be there at all. The room felt too quiet, too still, like the breath before a storm. Then the door opened. James walked in slowly. He wore no suit this time, just a worn denim shirt and khakis. But something about the way he stood made everyone else look smaller. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't slam a file. He just spoke, and every word had weight. "Let's get one thing clear," he began, his eyes sweeping the room. "I didn't come here to make a point. I came here because this place is my home, and I'm not leaving it to rot in silence." The treasurer tried to speak. "Mr. Garner, this isn't the time for—" James held up a hand, calm, firm. "It's exactly the time." He turned toward Cheryl, who tried to keep her gaze cold, but couldn't quite meet his eyes. "When you fined me, you didn't do it to enforce a rule. You did it because you thought I didn't belong. When you told my daughter she couldn't fish, it wasn't about permits, it was about power. You didn't see a father spending time with his child. You saw someone you didn't want near your lake. A hush filled the room. You thought you were protecting your space, but all you did was expose your heart. He let the silence linger before he continued. For 15 years I built my business from nothing. I worked while you slept. I invested while others mocked me. I bought land while folks laughed at the idea that a black man from East Oakland could own anything bigger than a backyard. A couple of board members shifted uncomfortably. But I didn't stop, because I wasn't working for your approval. I was working so my daughter wouldn't have to carry my pain. His voice cracked, but only slightly. I moved here thinking I had made it. Nice homes, clean streets, good schools. All it took was one afternoon, one phone call to security, and I realized, looked up. I hadn't escaped anything. I just paid to be treated like less. Cheryl opened her mouth, but the room held its breath. James stepped closer, not angry, just real. You could have knocked on my door and welcomed me. You could have seen me with my daughter and said, what a beautiful family. But instead, you called me a violation. He turned, addressing the whole room now. Let me be very clear. I didn't buy the lake to punish you. I bought it because I refused to let people like you decide where I'm allowed to exist. I bought it because no one else should go through what we did. And I bought it because when you strip away every excuse, every form, every committee meeting, what you did was racism. Word dropped like a stone. If no one else will say it, I will. You saw black skin and assumed guilt. You saw a peaceful father and chose fear. You saw a little girl smiling and felt the need to erase her joy. That's not policy. That's prejudice. Cheryl finally broke. You can't talk to us like this. We were just— James didn't flinch. Just doing your job, just following rules? He pointed toward the window where Mila stood outside beside her mother, watching through the glass. Tell her that. Tell her you were just doing your job when she cried in the back seat because you treated her like a criminal. No one spoke. No one dared. James took a deep breath, softened just slightly. I don't need an apology. I don't need a parade. I do need this room to understand something. He paused and delivered it like a sentence carved in stone. Respect isn't something you give to people who look like you. It's something you owe every human being, especially the ones you misunderstand. And he turned to leave. No anger, no insults, just truth. As he opened the door to leave the room, Cheryl whispered behind him, "You've embarrassed us." He stopped at the threshold, looked over his shoulder. "No," he said, "you did that to yourselves. I just stopped pretending not to notice." Then he walked out into the sunlight. The crowd outside didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They just made space, some even stepping back with quiet, "Oh." Mila ran up to him, grabbing his hand. He smiled and looked down at her. "You still want to go fishing?" She nodded hard. "Then let's go." He didn't just win. He restored what they tried to erase: dignity, honor, belonging. Back at the lake, the sun was setting. The orange light shimmered across the surface like quiet fire. James sat on the bench near the shore, watching Mila cast her line again and again. She laughed when the water splashed. Her joy was full, easy, not a trace of the pain she'd felt. Just days earlier, this wasn't just about fishing, it never was. What happened wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a paperwork error or a miscommunication. It was a reflection of something deeper. How a system, even in a peaceful suburb, still finds ways to remind people like James that they are only welcome when they stay small, stay quiet, stay grateful for being let in. But James didn't ask to be let in, he built his way in. And when they tried to remind him of his place, he answered without shouting, without violence, with power, principle, and presence. This story could have happened anywhere: a bank, a park, a school, a boardroom. It's not just about lakes and HOAs. It's about how America still struggles to see black excellence without suspicion, to accept black peace without policing it. James didn't win because he had money. He didn't win because he bought a lake. He won because he refused to let their fear define his worth. He showed that silence is not peace, and dignity doesn't need permission. His fight wasn't just for himself. It was for the next black father who just wants to teach his daughter to fish, for the next young girl who deserves to smile without someone turning her joy into a rule violation, for every person who's been told they don't belong, not by words but by the cold, calculated silence of systems designed to exclude. Because racism isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a fine in your mailbox, a rule no one else has to follow, a look that says, "Why are you here?" even when you've done everything right. But moments like this remind us of something greater. You can't see a man's story in his skin, only in his strength. You can't measure his worth by how quiet he stays, but by how boldly he stands when others try to shrink him. James didn't burn bridges, he lit a path paved in grace, not vengeance, in truth, not bitterness, in the quiet pride of a man who knew exactly who he was, long before they tried to reduce him to a complaint form. As Mila reeled in her line and came running back, James stood. They walked the shoreline together, father and daughter, not afraid, not ashamed, just free. And as they disappeared down the gravel trail, one thing echoed louder than any meeting room, louder than any fine or false accusation. Respect is not a favor. Respect is a right, never a request. Have you ever been judged, before they even knew your name? Faced a moment where your skin, your voice, or your presence was treated like a threat instead of a truth? If this story reminded you of something you've lived through, share it below. Your voice matters. Your story deserves to be seen. If you believe no one should have to earn basic respect, if you believe that dignity should never depend on where you live, what you look like, or how much money you make, then let the world know. Hit like, subscribe, and stand with those who refuse to be silent in the face of injustice. These stories aren't just stories, they're real, they're ours, and they're not done being told.